Hello everybody, my name is Paul Buitink and I'm here in Quito, Ecuador, together with Professor Bernard Lietaer. Bernard is a professor at the Sorbonne University in Paris and a well-known monetary reformer with decades of experience. He co-wrote, amongst others, the book Rethinking Money, How New Currencies Turn Scarcity into Prosperity. In 1992 he was named the world's top currency trader. Today we're going to talk about Bernard's specialty, the monetary ecosystem, and we will focus on a few main topics. First of all, the rise of citizen movements to change the way governments create money. Secondly, the new Ecuadorian payment system. And I would also like to briefly touch upon some of the problems right now in the Eurozone with Greece. During the conversation, we will of course also touch upon local currency initiatives and cryptocurrencies. It's a pleasure again to talk to you, Mr. Lietaer. Welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And maybe to start, can you first of all define money? What is money in your book?
Well, let's first start up with what everybody else or every conventional textbook defines it at, and why that's not really the correct way. Every textbook, interestingly, in every language I know, including in the Cuban environment or in the Soviet system or in the Chinese Maoist system, has defined money in terms of medium of exchange, standard of value, and store of value. That's a trap.
Why is it a trap?
Imagine that you have a language in which the word transport does not exist. They only use the word horses. Do you think there is any chance anybody will ever invent a bicycle or a car? They will perfect horses forever. Right?
Right.
Now, when you define things in terms of its function, because the classical definition, the three functions of money, it is not what money is. Once you define things in terms of its functions, you can't think out of it.
Right, so it's too narrowly defined and people are stuck inside this box of what money is.
It's even more sophisticated. Let me first give my definition.
Yeah.
My definition is money is an agreement. It lives in the same space as a marriage, as a political party, as a business contract, an agreement. It's an agreement within a particular community to use something standardized as a medium of exchange. That is my definition.
And that community can be also a virtual community, or does it have to be
any community?
Any kind of community. Yeah.
For the last 300 years, conventional money has been typically defined in terms of the space of a nation state.
Yeah.
But, you can have internet currencies, you can have neighborhood currencies, you can have currencies in specific fields. Let me give you an example, the miles of airlines, okay? That's a loyalty currency, like supermarket currencies. So there's community can be anything. Now, let's go back to the conventional one. See, the day that someone discovered or decided on the agreement of marriage, the next morning someone else defined divorce. In other words, once you have defined something in terms of its functions, you cannot have divorce.
Yeah, or the negative of that definition,
yes,
basically.
You're stuck with that field. So that's why it's a trap.
Right, and what is the consequence of the fact that we've been defining money in the wrong way all this time?
It's not the wrong way. It's
or in
terms of
one-dimensional way.
It locks you mentally into the existing system.
And what is the consequence of that?
That nobody seems to have been. It has been a very difficult process to start thinking outside of what in fact is today's money, which is bank debt money, right? We have a particular type of currency created in a particular type of process in a national environment, okay? And thinking outside of that has been very, very difficult.
But in a way, it sort of complies with your definition. If you look at the euro, for example, it's an agreement amongst people democratically decided within a certain zone where they use that money. So why doesn't it fit your definition, for example, the euro or anything?
The euro is an agreement. My definition of all currencies of any kind is an agreement. Okay? I'm just saying the way it's defined typically is not that way, because with agreements you can change agreements. You can actually, when an agreement doesn't work anymore, you could change it.
Yeah, and it's clearly not working well, the current agreements. That's why so many people are looking to alternatives. And that brings me to our first theme, the recent trend for citizens to question the way money is created and to engage in political debates. In England, we saw the Lower House discussing money creation due to the efforts of the action group Positive Money. And in Holland, a group of theater actors, crying out loud, and rebel economists have collected more than 100,000 signatures to also have money creation debated in parliament. They want the government to start creating debt-free and interest-free money, sort of a modified version of the Chicago Plan.
Yes.
What do you think of these initiatives?
Well, first of all, I think it's a very good sign that people become aware that there is an issue. Actually, I've been getting very desperate that since the 2007 and 2008 crisis, so very little debate has happened. When you compare what happened in the 1930s, in the 1930s it was an extraordinary ferment of academic debate and political debate on the same topic. We've gotten very small volume of that compared to a certainly less creative volume than what happened in the 1930s today.
How come? Was the crisis back then more severe, that people were more urged to talk about these things?
The crisis in the US was more severe, and that's where most of the intense debate occurred. But so one could conclude that the crisis wasn't bad enough.
Yeah, people are still too comfortable with their lifestyles, and they have their iPhones and their cars.
That could be one of the ways, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's a good thing then. We're finally. So maybe the crisis is getting deeper then. Even though politicians try to let us believe that it's all over, that the crisis is under control. But if we look at countries like Greece or Portugal, people are suffering, and also in countries like Belgium and Holland, it's far from over the crisis. So eventually, people then are motivated to start exploring these topics.
My suggestion would be that we look at what happened in Japan in the 1990s and the beginning of, until now. That's been 20 years in Japan that politicians have been saying we're getting out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's almost a generation.
It's a broken record. Yeah. And then if we look at, for example, in Holland, this modified version of the Chicago Plan, I think the main difference is that people are going to have an account directly with the central bank. It's kind of similar to what's going on in Ecuador, but we can discuss that later. Do you think that's a good plan? You think we should modify the way governments are currently, through the banking cartel and central banks, issuing money into something different, where they start issuing money directly themselves, the governments?
Well, my main problem with the Chicago Plan or its variations is that it doesn't touch the structural issue.
Which is?
The structural issue from my perspective is that we're dealing with a monoculture, a monopoly of a currency of any kind created whoever the authority is, okay, whether it's the banking system, you're still dealing with a monoculture. And my research in the last 8 years with Ulanovich and the other groups in America has been able to prove that the structural reason, there is a structural cause to the instability of our current money system, which is that it is a monoculture. It is a single type of currency, created the same way world over. Including in the Soviet system and including the Maoist system.
But you could argue that people have the opportunity to use other currencies, whether it's Bristol pound or Brixton pound or Bitcoin.
Recently, yes, but all the other stuff is still very marginal.
So we're moving towards your ideal situation in a way.
In fact, we've been doing this longer than most people perceive, because I mentioned the miles and loyalty currencies a while ago. We're living in a multiple currency environment.
Right, and of course, last century we had some of the experiments that you write about in your book, like the. Right now we have still the Vier, of course, but we also had the Wurgel in Austria and the Vara in Germany, but they were killed by the central bank, right? So
they were at that time killed by the central banks. Yes, the possibility of having what I call a monetary ecosystem. That is what will actually provide a structural stability. So I would be in favor of having governments issuing currency, okay? But why would you then stop having banks doing it? If people want to stop using them for whatever reason, that they can do that, okay? But replacing one monoculture with another monoculture, basically you're still not dealing with the structural issue.
Right, because the structure issue is the lack of diversity, and in
Yes.
your book you write about there needs to be an optimal balance between resilience and efficiency, right?
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. What we're dealing with is actually the conditions of stability of any complex flow network. There are lots of different kinds of complex flow networks in which different things circulate, including in our own bodies with the blood system or the immune system. Any natural ecosystem is a complex flow network in which biomass flows. Electrical distribution systems are complex flow networks in which electricity, electrons circulate, or economy is a complex flow network in which money circulates. So at that level of generality, we're able to find out that the conditions of stability for any complex flow network require a balance between two characteristics. One of them is efficiency, which is the volume of whatever flows in the system per unit of time, per year or per day. And the other one is resilience, which is the capacity for a complex flow network to change, to adapt to different circumstances, to an attack, to a disease, to a change of environment.
Right.
So now, having less diversity, and of course the extreme less diversity is monoculture, is more efficient.
Yeah.
Okay, but it is not resilient.
It's like a plane with one motor, but if the motor breaks down, it will crash. And if there's a plane has four motors, at least when something goes wrong with one, then the other ones can back up.
I would prefer the metaphor of pine forest,
right.
which is definitely the very productive way. It's very efficient, produces more wood per unit of time, per year. However, it's also very fragile. One cigarette and everything is gone. Okay.
And how do we get to this sort of perfect mix of resilience and efficiency? Like you also often talk about complementary currencies, so they function as a complement to the main currency.
Exactly.
But how can you avoid the main currency, or the central bank in this case, to kill the other project, like we've seen in Germany and Austria in the 30s of last century?
Well, I guess by learning. I hope we've gotten far enough now that we can actually understand the limitations of doing that. But really,
but central bankers, they want their power, right? So that they don't like competitive currencies because it limits their own scope.
I have never met anybody who enjoys a monopoly who will not try to keep it.
Exactly.
Okay? So it's going to have to be democracy that actually challenges that monopoly and the role of central banks, and that is starting to happen. Okay, so it's a sign that people get aware that there is something problematic. I can't guarantee, I don't know whether we're going to learn this time. What I can guarantee is that as long as you're going to have a monoculture, it's going to be unstable.
Right.
And the frequency of instabilities is much larger than most people are aware. We have 425 countries who are going through a systemic crash in the last 40 years. Okay? Yeah. That's more than 10 countries per year. Right, so the media invariably tend to talk about the crash as being the last crash, being the only crash, which is a trap again.
So, if I understand you correctly, your policy advice would be to communities, whether it's a small community like a town or a country, that sure, go ahead and create your own money, but allow for other currencies to exist as well. So provide the legal framework. Don't burden smaller currencies with onerous regulatory thresholds. Allow
Give
people
it a chance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Give it a chance. Find out what works, because we really have not much experience in environments with multiple currencies. Although we definitely do in a commercial world. I mean, many different organizations are doing this, but these loyalty currencies, as I call them, don't have much other benefit than basically helping the issuer to bring the clients back to the same shop or to the same airline. I think the technology is now there. What these systems have proven is two things. Number one, you can change behavior patterns in a large scale for a long time with a currency. And number two, you can do this very cheaply today, right, which is something that wasn't the case in the past.
Exactly, because of the fast advance within IT, we can, and also blockchain technology, we can issue transparent currencies. Let's talk a bit about Ecuador, because it's the main reason we are talking today is because we are both in Ecuador. I live in Quito, and you happen to be here, which is amazing and gives me the chance to talk to you. in Ecuador, maybe a lot of people don't know, but recently they've introduced a new currency, but it's actually not a currency, it's more of a new way to pay.
A new payment system.
It's a new payment system, yeah.
It's an electronic payment system, a digital payment system on a national level.
But it's still based on the dollar, because it's a dollarized country, but people are able to deposit physical dollars, and in return they get a credit, a balance on their phone, which can be a smartphone or a feature phone. Yeah. And almost everyone has a phone here. Like the other day, I saw people living on the street, 3 little girls, and they didn't have a home, but they did have a phone. So it's
there are 1.7. There are 17 million mobile phones, and there's 14 million people, including the babies. Okay.
Yeah. So
the average has to be about 2 phones per person of adults.
So what do you think of this development here in Ecuador?
It's number one, very exciting. I think it provides a completely new way of addressing several issues. It's not the only thing that's very original in Ecuador. Okay, I mean, for people who don't know Ecuador, it's a country that also has managed to pry the central bank loose from the banking system. In other words, the central bank in Ecuador is now under the control of the government. And that's why, by the way, the payment system that you're talking about happens with the central bank.
Yeah, because people open an account directly. I did it last week or a few weeks ago, and I have now an account directly with the central bank. And I think it's the only country where you can bank directly with the central bank.
Exactly. It's unique. It's also a country that not only is dollarized, but also its major export is oil. So they're now going to be forced, in my view, to actually do something new. Because with the price of oil dropping and the dollar going up in value, this has two effects. Number one, for the same quality of oil you get less dollars, and the dollar getting more expensive, and that's the only currency you have nationally. You stop being competitive with all the other countries in your neighborhood, that are devaluing in terms of the dollar. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a shortage of dollars here, right? Because there's capital controls or import restrictions. It's very difficult to import stuff from here because you have to pay a lot of tax because they want to keep the dollars in the country.
Yes. Well, that's the only currency they have.
Yeah.
So that configuration is actually going to oblige them to start inventing new things. And I see the possibility for them doing that, particularly with the digitalization of the currency. It's also a country that has a lot of cooperative banks and financial institutions. So there is an environment which I could see the possibility of actually creating a monetary ecosystem with having cooperatives becoming dual currency banks like you have in Brazil. Like you have in the Wier in Switzerland for 80 years, or you provide a completely different dynamic of the economy than is currently possible.
Do you think they will break away from the dollar? This is just the first step in that process?
That's not what I think. I mean, anything can happen. But it's not what I'm suggesting to do, by the way. It's not what the suggestion is. We're back to the same situation as the Chicago Plan. When you have a system, the best way of introducing diversity is not by throwing away what you have. Okay?
Yeah.
Develop other things in parallel without killing what you have. All right? So that's my core argument here, and it applies to Ecuador as well.
Yeah. And are there certain risks you see? For one risk I see, well, apart from that it could turn into a new currency that they possibly overinflate, like they have done in the past, that there is a lack of privacy for the citizens because everyone.
My recommendation is not to go for a national second currency, but with a decentralized currency, like they do in Brazil. There are now 200 dual currency banks being launched in Brazil, where the areas where there is a requirement or use for more liquidity than is possible today, in that environment it makes sense to create a regional currency or a local currency, or even a business-to-business currency, that actually functions in parallel with the dollar in this environment and provides liquidity in places where they otherwise have a tough time getting it.
Yeah, but liquidity attracts liquidity, right? And there's always a network effect with currencies. So how do you avoid that one currency becomes so dominant? We see it, for example, in the cryptocurrency industry. There's Bitcoin, and it's like a tail. There's Bitcoin,
Yes,
and then there's a lot of hundreds of
others,
very small ones, and they don't seem to get traction. Bitcoin, of course, also has difficulties getting traction, but it's kind of people flock to the currency that they can use the most easily. So how do you avoid the local currencies from how do you make sure local currency stay relevant if there are these big dominant global currencies that attract more people?
If you do have enough flexibility, by the way, I'm not recommending that there is a particular number of currency that would be needed. Just like in a natural ecosystem, like a forest, there's a chance for another pine, okay, even if there is fine. If nobody needs a pine or if nobody needs a currency, why would it need to promote it, okay? But I think having more than one is the key.
Yeah.
We don't know, we can have too many, okay? The objective is not to have as much as possible.
Yeah.
When you have too many currencies, you end up with stagnation, okay?
Yeah.
Nothing happens anymore. So there is an equilibrium to be found. And in the monetary domain, I don't think we know enough yet to find out where that is. Yeah. So I would say, let's take away the constraints for people to start new ones. Okay?
Exactly.
And then see what happens.
But here in the new the laws that were created last year in July, I haven't read everything, but what I've read is that it's they kind of not allow people to use other currencies apart from the dollar in Ecuador. So even though there might be advantages of using this new system, they make it very difficult for, at least on paper, there's no jurisprudence yet, but it's sort of scary to use other currencies because you never know how they will treat you if you do so.
I've looked at the code that was introduced. There is actually no impediment for new innovations in that domain. Maybe you don't have to call it money. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You can find a way to work around it, but
we have the same situation in Europe. Huh?
Yeah.
The legislation on the Maastricht Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty specifies that there's only one currency, and it's the one that's created in the form of bills by the central bank. Well, I'm sorry, but we're talking about an electronic currency that doesn't take any form of that is not printed by anybody.
Right.
So actually, there are loopholes.
Yeah, and in an ecosystem like you propose, you think it's necessary also for governments to accept different types of currencies for taxes in order to make it a level playing field?
That is one way. That is one way of promoting. But in the case of Ecuador, I would not recommend to do it on a central level. There is business-to-business currencies like the complementary currency circuits, the C3.
Yeah.
That would be convertible into dollars, where I would recommend the Ecuadorian government to accept in payment of taxes, because it is convertible in dollars, and that makes it possible to have your budgets in a single currency, which is going to be necessary if you make it, to go to buy a car as a government here. You can't just do it for 10% or 20% of the suppliers, okay? Members of a club. That's why in Switzerland we never had the beer accepted in payment of taxes. Okay, now understanding that about a quarter of all businesses we accept the beer in Switzerland, the government cannot accept it, and that's the key element for going a currency mainstream. So in the case of convertible currencies that are solid enough, I would recommend the Ecuadorian government to accept the currency in payment of taxes. However, in most cases we're talking of social purpose currencies. And in that environment, number one, they're not convertible. And number two, you could have imagined that a city or a particular region decides to provide an impulse.
Exactly. To start accepting things.
And accepting or actually issuing them.
Yeah.
And issuing them and accepting them at the same time.
Right.
That is clearly a possibility. That would be one way of having some diversity coming rather quickly.
Let's talk also a little bit about Greece before we wrap up. If I follow if we just try to implement your theory in practice, it makes sense for the Greek government or for local Greek municipalities or provinces to start working on their own currencies, that in case it goes wrong with the euro, which is possible, I mean, Brexit is the day of the word every day, that at least they have a backup system that they can, that the economy can function even without the euro. So is that advice you would give to the Greek people? Start working on your own currencies?
I would definitely do that. I would actually even consider having regional or city governments issuing what I call a civic currency, which is a currency that's issued by the city and accepted or required in a payment of tax, until you basically get better, reduce the unemployment level to possible levels.
Yeah.
Once you have city with 50% unemployment, how the hell can you survive?
It would also increase their cards when they negotiate with the European Union,
Exactly.
right? Because now the European Union knows that they have nothing. So maybe they should do it in a stealth mode, use the next 4 months to build up something in parallel without disclosing it, and then all of a sudden they can play that card whenever.
Well, it's difficult to have a popular currency without nobody knowing that.
Well, you can build the infrastructure now, and then.
Yes.
Would you recommend to use blockchain technology so the bureaucrats have to all the expenses are transparent and visible in a public data in a decentralized shared public database? Is that something you would be in favor of?
The Bitcoin model, as is currently, there are several aspects that I don't think would make it useful for what we're talking about. The main element is that it really is a speculation tool rather than a medium of exchange.
Yeah, purely the technology, so not so much
the technology, not the currency.
Yeah, having like a decentralized ledger of
Yes.
public records and transactions.
Yes. The technology, yes. The architecture, yes. The currency, no.
Right.
Okay. The currency, by the way, it's gotten the blockchain has gotten too big to actually become useful in terms of processing. You don't have the volume that you could process for making a mainstream currency. You have to process, by now it's 4 to 6 transactions per second, which is not enough for.
Well, there's a lot of ways to improve scalability,
Sure.
but in general, like having there's a lot of corruption in bureaucracy in Greece, or if they would have to use a transparent currency where everyone can check the transactions, then at least you can try to
Yes.
avoid corruption.
Yes, I am in favor of the blockchain to be used, and spender-signed currency would be one way of describing what you're talking about. At the moment you spend the currency, you leave your imprint on it,
Yeah,
leave
exactly.
identity on it, and that would get rid of a lot of corruption and
Exactly,
basically,
yeah.
black markets. Because so yes, there are features of the Bitcoin design, the architecture, that are very useful, and I believe I have a very big future. But the Bitcoin currency, as it's currently operational, presented, I don't think will be the tool, the ideal tool for what we're talking about.
Right. Okay. We also discussed that in our previous interview, so we don't have to go through that again. But thank you so much. We've already been talking for almost half an hour, and we discussed the things we want to discuss. Is there something you want to add to this conversation? Where can people find you or read your
I'm
books?
actually pretty excited about the potential for Ecuador.
Yeah.
Because they are forced to invent something, and they have equipped themselves. I don't know by purpose or not, but they have actually equipped themselves with the key tools for a breakthrough. That would be the first, could become the first country that is ready with an economy of the 21st century, with a monetary ecosystem operational very efficiently by mobile phones.
Yeah, and for people that don't grasp the ramifications right now, there are like 8,000 people that downloaded the wallet, but the government wants 500,000 people using this currency before the end of the year. And of course, with other currencies in the free market, it's difficult to find use cases. But here, they will probably be forcing or stimulating taxi drivers to accept, and they will start accepting taxes with this currency. So they are going to impose use cases, whether you like it or not. But it will lead to high adoption rates, of course, because people are
Yes.
basically forced to use it.
The government is currently considering privileging the payment of taxes via it. That would be one way. There are bonus, desarrollo, which are for
Like welfare, right?
welfare systems that could be distributed via mobile phones. So these are all features. I'm very optimistic.
And are you officially an advisor to the government in this matter? Or?
De facto, I am. Let's put it in those terms.
That's why you're here.
That's
anyway.
That's why I'm here.
You're not here on
They
holidays,
invited
right?
me. They invited me. So in fact, yes, but I'm not having any official title, and
Right. So you're free to speak your mind, and
I'm not looking for one either.
Right,
So
yeah, okay, you have enough titles already as it is. Right?
well, that's not the point. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I think it's an very exciting potential. It's more promising even than I hope when I accepted to come.
Right, awesome. And then people can find you on the internet. What's the best way to connect to you?
www.lietaer.com, Lietaer, my family name.com, and it has a fair amount of data, including, for the academics, I would suggest look at the research part, because there are several articles. We've been talking about the parallel with ecosystems, and that is not a metaphor.
No, it's hard science.
It is hard science. It's not my opinion, and it's not a metaphor. We can prove that we need going from a monoculture to a monetary ecosystem,
right,
scientifically, and it's time that we do that.
So, hopefully this conversation will trigger people to work on that. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and
Thank you very much.
and we'll put this online as soon as possible.
All right.